So in our last class, I told you I was going to make a video to help you out for studying for the lab practical, and I asked you all, what is the most complicated topic, or like what topic could I cover that would be the most helpful for you? And I'm going to do two things for you today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an example station so you can see what the lab practical will be like. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to go through some of the foramen in the skull. There's a lot of tiny little holes everywhere, and if you don't know what you're looking at, it can be really hard to know what am I pointing at or what am I trying to get you to identify. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write some of the foramen on the board that I'm going to go over in this video today, but I'm going to group them in a way that I think makes it easier to learn. So when you're looking at a skull and you're trying to figure out what hole is being pointed at, I think it's really important to have just like one foramen that you're gonna know super solid so you can learn all the foramen around them, right? This is kind of like an anchor point. And the one that I always start with is the foramen ovale. So we'll start by looking at the foramen ovale or ovale, right? The oval hole or the oval foramen. So I figure if you can find this structure, and I'm gonna star it just to show you how important I think it is. And as long as you can identify this structure, then that gives you some sort of anchoring point. So once you find the foramen ovale, I think it's really important to find 3 foramen around it, right? I think the obvious one that we're gonna look at first is the spinosum. And I think also associated with this, you should learn in this group, the rotundum. And that is once you find these 3, you can find what we call the composite foramen, the foramen lacerum, right? So again, this is a composite, and what is that? The foramen lacerum. We'll start with these 4 foramen, we'll look at them in some skulls, and then we'll see, hopefully, that this makes a little bit more sense. So when we're taking a look at the skull, I'm going to start with the superior view because I think that's a little bit easier to see. So I'm just going to turn this around. So again, this is the front of the skull or the anterior. We're just going to turn it around. So again, this is anterior here. Here's posterior back here. The one that I want to focus on, the one that I think you should be able to identify in every skull you look at first, is going to be your foramen ovale. So you're going to have one on the left side and one on the right side, but I'll focus on the left over here. And this hole right there, this one right here that I'm putting the stick in right there, that's going to be your foramen ovale. If you know and you are confident that you can find the foramen ovale on either side, one over here, one over there, you can start to learn the other foramen in relationship to this structure. You just have to go a little posterior, and sometimes it shows them some skulls, sometimes it doesn't. But right there, this tiny little hole just looks like someone punched a small little thing through. That's going to be your foramen spinosum. All right, so that's 2. The third one, the rotundum, is a circular hole. Rotundum means circular. And to find it, you actually have to take the skull and tilt it forward a little bit. All right, so remember, here's our foramen ovale. You tilt it forward, and you see that foramen sticking out right there. All right, let me bring it a little bit closer. That is your foramen rotundum. So I mentioned that there was going to be one other hole that we're looking at. This is the composite foramen, and it's the foramen lacerum. Where do you find the foramen lacerum? You just have to go medial to the foramen ovale. So here I'm starting with the foramen ovale. If we go medial, do you see this hole right here? Big hole right there. Let's bring it a little bit closer. That one. All right, let's look at some different views. I'm just gonna take the skull and I'm gonna flip it. So now we're looking at an inferior view. I want you to focus on the foramen ovale. What's the foramen ovale? This one right here. It's not gonna be the one that is most medial. It's gonna be the one off to the side over here. But if you go a little bit more medial, that is your composite foramen lacerum. Ovale, lacerum. Ovale, lacerum. And the last 2 foramen that we're going to be looking at are going to be the jugular and the carotid, right? So we're going to look at the jugular foramen and the carotid canal. Now, even though these 2 words are different, foramen versus canal, you can just think about them as holes in the skull. So these two can get mixed up really easily, so let's take a look at it. So the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna have an inferior view of the skull so that we can look at the carotid canal and the jugular foramen. These are gonna be a little bit more posterior from the foramen we've been looking at previously. So if I hold this up a little bit, again, I'm gonna identify the foramen ovale, nice little landmark every single time. And if we go posterior to that, we'll see two holes. One big hole over here that kind of looks like a cup, and then another hole over here where if I tilt the skull, you'll see it's actually a pretty substantial hole. So one of these is the jugular, one of these is the carotid. How can you tell the difference? The jugular is the much bigger one, where I actually have to tilt the skull forward a little bit so you can see just how big this hole is. That's gonna be your jugular foramen. This hole right here, that looks more just like a cup structure, that's gonna be your carotid canal. Now you can kind of see these from the superior view as well. It's a little bit more difficult, but you can definitely see this giant gap right here. So again, let's put the whole skull in view. This giant gap right here is going to be the jugular foramen. The carotid canal you can't really see coming from this view. The last thing I want to do is I want to show you what this lab practical is going to look like. I'm sitting at one of the lab benches right now, so we'll pan around just to see where I am right now. And basically you're going to sit at a station, you're going to have some material in front of you, answer the questions, and then you'll wait for your lab professor to say that it's time to go to the next station. But when they say it's time for you to get up, you will go take your answer sheet, you'll stand up, you'll move to the next station. So I'm just moving to the next table over here. You'll sit down, and then what you'll have in front of you is what you'll have to answer for the next 90 seconds. So once you sit down, you'll see, okay, there's a skull that's in front of me. Note, you can't touch the material, but you can kind of like get up and like look around a little bit. So there's your skull. You'll see that there will be an index card that is going to have two parts. Identify this bone is referring specifically to a sticker that says A, and 1B is referring to B. Now where's B? Where's B? There's a stick, I can see B, and it looks like it's going through one of the foramen that we went over. So once you get to your station, you'll take your answer sheet, and this is what your answer sheet looks like. A blank piece of paper. You will find the blank for 1A and 1B and write your answer in those blanks. If we take a close look, we'll see that we don't see the whole bone, but we have a good idea of what this bone is, right? There's a zygomatic process sticking out. We know that this is the side of the skull. So the answer to 1A is temporal bone. So what you would do is once you have your answer, you would go down to 1A and write temporal bone. Then you look at the next question. 1B, identify this composite structure. Remember, you cannot touch the material you have in front of you, but you can get up a little bit to get a better view. So we see that there's the stick. We see that it is not going through our foramen ovale. It's going through a foramen that's a little bit more medial. And actually, this question gives you a good hint, right? Identify this composite structure. We know that this hole is going to be a composite foramen. So what composite foramen is there that is medial to the foramen ovale? That's your foramen lacerum. You would write down foramen lacerum in answer 1B. Once you're done, you fold up your sheet, you wait to see if it's time to go to the next station, and then when it's time, you take all your things, you leave the question, but then you'll go to the next station. So your lab instructor will have a couple more instructions for you in terms of how do you know which station to go to next. So just make sure that you're paying attention to your lab instructor at the very beginning. And most important, breathe, try to work through the problems, try to pull out that information from your brain that you've been working on for the past 3 weeks. Now, I will mention that I went over a couple of foramen, but I didn't go through all of the foramen. There are many more foramen that you should be studying and you should be aware of, but you should use similar techniques to what I've been doing, right? Find a structure that you know, make sure you know it very well, learn everything around it. All right, best of luck. I got to go set up the exam.